Hi, this is Victoria Justice reporting from Fairbanks, Alaska. Today I'll be discussing the weather conditions for January and March. We will be reviewing in both Sandpoint and Fairbanks. Sandpoint is located off the Alaska Peninsula, right about here. It is approximately 55 degrees 20 minutes north and 160 degrees 30 minutes west, which is about 570 air miles from Anchorage. There are about 1,000 people that live there. Fairbanks is located in interior Alaska. It is at approximately 64.8378 degrees north and 147.7164 degrees west. It's about 262 miles to Fairbanks from Anchorage. There are about 33,000 people that live in Fairbanks, but around 100,000 people in the Fairbanks North Star Borough. My week of observations are from Monday, January 25th, Thursday, January 28th, and Sunday, January 31st. I will also be observing from Sunday, March 20th, Tuesday, March 22nd, and Sunday, March 27th. To start off, we're going to look at the temperature for Sandpoint and Fairbanks from January 23rd to February 2nd. The red line is the NWS hourly temperatures. The three black curves represent the maximum, minimum, and daily averages. Looking at the graph for Sandpoint, you can see that the weather actually stays pretty constant. It peaks a little bit on Sunday, March 31st, but then goes back to the typical weather for that week. It's above the NWS minimum the entire time, as well as the average. It dips below the maximum a couple times over the week period, on March 28th and on March 31st. I will be focusing on the days January 25th, 28th, and 31st. On the first day, January 25th, 2016, there is a maximum temperature of 43 degrees Fahrenheit, a minimum temperature of 37 degrees Fahrenheit, and a range of 6 degrees Fahrenheit, which leads to an average temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The average temperature variation between the NWS data and the climate mean temperature is negative 8 degrees Fahrenheit. On January 28th, there is a maximum temperature of 39 degrees, a minimum temperature of 34 degrees, a temperature range of 5 degrees, and an average temperature of 36.5 degrees Fahrenheit. The average temperature variation between the NWS data and the climate mean temperature is negative 5 degrees Fahrenheit. On January 31st, there is a maximum temperature of 39 degrees, a minimum temperature of 33 degrees, a temperature range of 6 degrees, and an average temperature of 36 degrees Fahrenheit. The average temperature variation between the NWS data and the climate mean temperature is negative 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit. In Fairbanks, the graph shows low temperature in the beginning of the week, high temperature in the middle and near the end of the week, and the lowest temperatures are at the very end of the week. On January 25th, the maximum temperature for Fairbanks was 13 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum temperature was negative 8, the average temp was 2.5 degrees, and the temperature range was 7 degrees. This is very different from Sandpoint, where the temperatures were much higher. On January 28th, the maximum temperature was 18 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum was 5 degrees, the mean temperature was 11.5 degrees, and the temperature range was 13 degrees. This is also much lower than Sandpoint's. On January 31st, the maximum temperature was 8 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum temperature was negative 8 degrees, the average temperature was 0 degrees, and the temperature range was also 0 degrees. Once again, this is lower than Sandpoint's temperatures by quite a bit. Now we're going to look at the NWS pressure for Sandpoint and Fairbanks from January 23rd to February 2nd. There is a pretty significant change in pressure in Sandpoint throughout the week. The maximum pressure is on Monday, February 1st, and the minimum pressure is on Monday, January 25th. It goes along with the previous slide, showing that the higher temperatures coincide with the high pressures, and the lower temperatures coincide with the lower pressures. In Fairbanks, the pressure also has a pretty drastic change. It starts in about the middle at the beginning of the week, has a low point on January 28th, and it gets its highest on January 31st. This is different from Sandpoint, where their lowest pressure was on January 25th, and their highest pressure was on February 1st. Now we move on to the dew point temperature and relative humidity for Sandpoint and Fairbanks from January 23rd to February 2nd. The green dotted line represents the NWS relative humidity data, and the blue solid line represents the NWS data point. I'm going to start with the dew point temperature in Sandpoint. On January 25th, the maximum is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum is 31 degrees, and the average temperature was 31.5 degrees. On January 28th, the maximum temperature was 31 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum was 23 degrees, and the average temperature was 27 degrees. On January 31st, the maximum temperature was 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum was 30 degrees, and the average was 31 degrees. The relative humidity seems to coincide with the dew point. There doesn't seem to be major outliers. The highest relative humidity was at about 90% humidity, and the lowest relative humidity was at about 65% humidity. In Fairbanks, on January 25th, the dew point temperature maximum is 9 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum is negative 11 degrees, and the average is negative 1 degrees. This is a lot lower than Sandpoint's. On January 28th, the maximum temperature is 14 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum is 1 degree, and the average is 7.5 degrees. This is lower than Sandpoint's dew point temperature. On January 31st, the maximum temperature was 5 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum temperature was negative 10 degrees, and the average temperature was negative 2.5 degrees. Once again, this is lower than Sandpoint's dew point temperatures. The relative humidity doesn't seem to be consistent with the dew point temperatures. They don't dip and rise at the same rates. So looking at our weather maps for Monday, January 25th, Sandpoint is the lower star and Fairbanks is the highest star. In Sandpoint, there is a low pressure zone. There seems to be little to no clouds over this area. In Fairbanks, there doesn't seem to be any pressure zones nearby, but there is thick cloud cover and snow to the southwest. For Thursday, January 28th, in Sandpoint, there seems to be a low pressure zone in the area with no clouds. In Fairbanks, there is a low pressure zone and heavy clouds. On Sunday, January 31st, there is a heavy cloud cover over Sandpoint and very dark clouds hovering over Fairbanks. There is a high pressure system just to the east of Fairbanks. Now we're going to look at the weeks of March 19th to 29th. The temperatures in Sandpoint are going to be discussed first, and then we're going to go to Fairbanks. Looking at the graph for Sandpoint, the temperatures actually stay pretty centered around the average, max, and min for that time period. On March 20th, the maximum temperature was 28 degrees, the minimum temperature was 25 degrees, the average temperature was 26.5 degrees, and the temperature range was 3 degrees. On March 22nd, the maximum temperature was 37 degrees, the minimum temperature was 30 degrees, the average temperature was 33.5, and the temperature range was 7 degrees. On March 27th, the maximum temperature was 45 degrees, the minimum temperature was 38 degrees, the average temperature was 41.5 degrees, and the temperature range was 7 degrees Fahrenheit. In Fairbanks, on March 20th, the maximum temperature was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, the minimum temperature was 3 degrees, the average temperature was 20.5 degrees, and the temperature range was 35 degrees. This is actually very similar to the temperatures in Sandpoint, but the minimum temperature was a lot colder. On March 22nd, the maximum temperature was 41 degrees, the minimum temperature was 10 degrees, the average temperature was 25.5 degrees, and the temperature range was 31 degrees. Once again, this is almost the same as Sandpoint, though the maximum temperature was quite a bit lower this time. On March 27th, the maximum temperature was 39 degrees, the minimum temperature was 27 degrees, the average temperature was 33 degrees, and the temperature range was 12 degrees. This is just like what happened in Sandpoint, but with just a little bit lower temperatures. Now we're going to look at the pressures for both Sandpoint and Fairbanks for the week of March 19th to March 29th. In Sandpoint, the pressure stays pretty consistent. There's a high pressure on March 26th, then a low pressure the very next day, March 27th. In Fairbanks, the pressure is even more consistent. There is a high pressure on March 19th, and the lowest pressure stays that low from March 26th to March 27th. The pressures in Sandpoint are just a little bit lower than the pressures in Fairbanks. Now, we're going to look at the dew point temperatures and the relative humidity for Sandpoint and Fairbanks. In Sandpoint, on March 20th, the maximum dew point temperature was 21 degrees, the minimum dew point was 11 degrees, and the average temperature was 16 degrees. On March 22nd, the maximum temperature was 28 degrees, the minimum temperature was 25 degrees, and the average temperature was 26.5 degrees. On March 27th, the maximum was 43 degrees, the minimum was 36 degrees, and the mean was 39.5. The relative humidity in Sandpoint seems to coincide pretty well with the dew point temperatures. In Fairbanks, on March 20th, the maximum dew point temperature was 19 degrees, the minimum dew point temperature was 0 degrees, and the average dew point temps was 9.5 degrees. This is right around where Sandpoint's dew point temperatures were at. On March 22nd, the maximum temperature was 19 degrees, the minimum was 3 degrees, and the average was 11 degrees. Sandpoint's dew point temperatures were much higher. On March 27th, the maximum temperature was 33 degrees, the minimum temperature was 22 degrees, and the average temperature was 27.5 degrees. Sandpoint's dew point temperatures were about 10 degrees higher than Fairbanks on this day. Fairbanks' relative humidity is all over the place on this graph. It doesn't seem to coincide at all with the dew point temperatures. Now we're going to look at the weather maps for March 20th to March 27th. Fairbanks is once again the top star, and Sandpoint is the bottom star. For Sunday, March 20th, both Sandpoint and Fairbanks have cloud cover and are somewhat close to a low pressure system. On Tuesday, March 22nd, both Sandpoint and Fairbanks seem to have a very minimal cloud cover. Sandpoint is close to a low pressure system. On Sunday, March 27th, Sandpoint is right next to a low pressure system and there is a heavy cloud cover. Fairbanks is right next to a low pressure system as well, though there doesn't seem to be very many clouds. Knowing everything I just mentioned, it seems that Fairbanks is definitely colder and more spread out with their temperatures than Sandpoint, and their pressure is about the same. The humidity is way more sporadic in Fairbanks than Sandpoint. And this concludes the weather report for Unit 14 and 15.